Um, so you're muted. Beautiful flowers, though.
You're still muted, Allison, but your face is telling us a lot. So.
But the snow has totally wiped out all our daffodils. So I had to bring up this one to pay homage to all the poor ones that are being devastated in the garden right now.
So as I was just saying, we have a little bit of time. I'd like to talk about H313 for about the next 10 minutes or so. I'm happy to start off. I have sympathy for Mr. Newman, but it's, there is the challenge here of changing the law for one person. And even Mr. Newman, who I respect deeply, in case you didn't know, he's probably one of the fathers of our craft beer industry, having started Magic Hat. Even he says he values the Tide laws and their purpose behind it. He's just in a catch-22. So I'm certainly willing to hear what he comes back with after talking to the department to see if there's some creative ways to do this. But
Mr. Chair, I was just reading during the break an article about California and some of what California has tried to do regarding Tide laws. And one of the things that struck me was that they were faced with so many different issues that kept popping up with Tide laws that they kept trying to change them. They almost gave up because, in fact, I'll try to find it and send it out to everyone. It kind of puts in perspective how these laws can wreak havoc in terms of what people want to do that appears otherwise to make sense. And one of the things that's mentioned is just the notion of perhaps adding something so that you don't do on these one-off situations. The suggestion being that this isn't the only one that we're going to face, is to put something in legislation that gives the department some flexibility to be able to deal with the laws without locking them into this particular course of action. And this might be something we want to consider.
Thank you for that. It may be exactly the kind of situation where I usually am not a big fan of giving discretion to agencies without some guardrails, but this may be one of those situations. I mean, if we got down to something like a percentage, I can tell you right now, 35 to 40% is not where I would land. That person has a lot of say of what that business is going to do, So I just don't know if these laws are even necessary in the world of competition we're in right now. But let's see what they come back with. I think the bigger issue is the other issue, which is I guess my feeling is, it needs some time. It might be the right thing to do, but there are a lot of touchstone points of issues like Senator Clarkson raised. How do you advertise it? Where do you put it in the grocery? What's the right percentage? Is there any kind of new enforcement? How does it tie up with, the whole flavor thing we dealt with marijuana? It's a lot to be dealing with in the few weeks we have at this point. One of the ways I was thinking that maybe we could approach it would be, they say they have a hearing with House General, and House General seems to have a lot more time on their hands than we do at this point. Maybe we should wait and get a signal from them. I'd hate to put a lot of effort peeling back the onion on this issue to get it right, and then have them only say, we're not ready to deal with it this year. So that's my thoughts, but I'd like to hear from others.
Well, as you know, I think it's actually raised more questions, and I'm one of the sponsors of this bill. And at first blush, I thought, why not? But I actually now think that there are parallels in other bills that we have in our committee that raise similar issues, which is access points, and how are these industries making things more attractive to younger people to build consumership early on. And flavored products are, we're being asked to consider flavored products as a really challenging health hazard in one area with vaping, e-cigarettes, and cigarettes. And here, this also, I will remind us that alcohol has a huge impact on our state budget, not in the positive way with revenues and with growth industries, but also in over $300 million in court costs and DUI and family disruption. I mean, alcohol abuse is a huge problem too. So, but I'm now, it's given me pause and to think, wow, so I would want to have it marketed and in a place that was different from where all the seltzers were, for example. Anyway, it's just given me pause to think, how do we consistently address these things that are in our committee? And I'm sort of surprised by myself, but it all of a sudden hit me that actually they're not dissimilar.
Right.
So,
And, go ahead, Senator Rahm.
I mean, I think I was going to make kind of the opposite point, though I don't think it's contradictory to what Allison said. I mean, I think we're all concerned about, alcohol abuse, especially coming out of the pandemic. What I've actually seen is that there are a lot of trends of low alcohol products that are helping people taper their alcohol use. I mean, I just want to say we've started this conversation around, aqua. I never know how to pronounce the second. Vitae. Thank you. Sorry to the manufacturer. Kombuchas, near beer, things that are very low alcohol are like Vermont craft products that are kind of in line with our brand about trying to offer people healthy alternatives to they might have one craft beer, but then also drink some kombucha and taper their alcohol use. So, it shouldn't be lost on us that this all happened because we were talking about other low alcohol sealed beverages. I have, I just, talked to an acquaintance who's in their 30s, who's working with, folks around like non-alcoholic canned beverages that have bitters and there's Vermont is exploding with ideas for how to offer people flavorful artisan beverages that get them away from high alcohol content. So I think this is a way to be really flexible in the industry about how we offer people choice as they figure out what kind of new relationship they want to have with alcohol after the pandemic.
No, that's a valid, that's of course another aspect to it, but I think there are lots of aspects to this discussion, and you're absolutely right. It could be that it's, but that's the same argument many use for vaping is helps take you off heavy smoking habits. That's one of the arguments in the vaping flavored vaping scene too. Anyway, I think it for me raises additional questions. That's
I also think we can't just look away, even though it sounded like the commissioner said it was no big deal, to the loss of $300,000 to liquor and lottery. I don't know that their workload is going to go down by $300,000. That's 3 positions. Anyhow, there's a lot there. Let's noodle it over the weekend, but I'm inclined to wait on how they're received in the House. I'm certainly willing to look at it with more time next year if need be, but to do it justice, I think it's going to be a time suck that we can't really afford at this point. So anyhow, if that's a good way forward, we do have Lewis Porter who has joined us, and we could move on to his testimony.
Terrific. Thank you.
Good morning, Lewis. Good to see you. We're focused, as you probably know, on the ARPA proposal, which I believe is $2.25 million for FY22. That would be coming to your department, and we'd like to hear your enthusiastic support for that, which I'm sure we'll hear, and exactly what it is.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm always enthusiastic about getting money to my department, so no worries.
I know.
We've noticed. I'm appreciating your parental pandemic beard.
Yeah, I haven't shaved since May was born, and I'm a little afraid if I do now, she won't recognize me. So
This was true for Oliver too.
for the record, Lewis Porter, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm glad to be here this morning, and thanks for having me. And I have also on the line with me in your meeting, Steve Gomez, who's the director of our budgets and licensing office. So if I say anything incorrect, Steve will jump in and correct it. It's always good to bring somebody who knows what they're talking about to these things. So I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about ARPA funding, but if I could, I would like to just briefly step back a little bit and talk about additional funding the department's gotten in the last couple of years and what we've done with it, because I think that informs some of the discussion about ARPA. So we are a department of about 142 employees, give or take. Our mission is a pretty incredible one, in my view, which is the maintenance and improvement of fish and wildlife and habitats of all species and plants across the state of Vermont for the benefit and use of Vermonters. And we are lucky in that we have a department that people are very happy to work with and like to work for. And we have a whole bunch of very dedicated people who work for us, for the department and for Vermonters on that mission through a whole wide variety of ways. But the fundamental principle, the fundamental guiding principle of our department, I think, is that humans tend to preserve and protect and conserve the things that they use and that sustain them. And we are an environmental department, but our way to get to achieve our environmental mission is largely based on encouraging use of wildlife of different kinds, whether that's bird watching, wildlife photography, or hunting, fishing, and trapping. So having said that, we do, I think, quite a good job of that. I'm proud of the work that we've done. I've been here for kind of a long time for a commissioner, about 7 years. And in general, I would say that our approach has been to use what I would call sort of our normal budget and capital appropriations to maintain the kind of base level of our work. And then we use additional revenue, additional money that we get to try to expand the opportunity to engage in wild land and wild life for people in the state, both through the types of opportunities and the places that we provide, but also the people that we reach out to and the communities that we reach out to engage in that. So with that overly long preamble, in the last couple of years, we've been fortunate enough to get a couple of $1 million a year ultimately from Senator Leahy and the EPA for wetland restoration. And we have been putting that money to the ground, essentially buying marginal farmland and restoring it to wetlands along rivers and streams. This is water quality money. The goal of this money is to improve, to decrease the number of nutrients flowing into Lake Champlain. But it also provides a great opportunity to open the door for wildlife access and wild land access in different parts of the state. And notably in the Winooski River Valley and the lower Winooski River. We've done about $4 million or so of that work so far. And we have conserved about 2,400 acres so far, and plan on restoring about 60% of that acreage to wetlands. I'll get back to that in a second and why I mentioned it in relationship to ARPA money, but let me just go forward for a second and say, we were fortunate enough in the CARES Act to get about $2 million to spend just under $2 million in CARES Act money. The bulk of that, 1.7 million, went to improving access to public lands and waters. So we have 100 wildlife management areas. We have about 200 boat access areas around the state. And we did a lot of projects to improve access and information and availability of those resources to Vermonters using that 1.8 million. The reason we did that was twofold, both because it's our mission to provide that kind of access and that we think that we know that people will restore and protect wildlife species and habitats if they use them, however that use is defined, but also because of the economic importance that these areas and this type of activity plays in Vermont. Vermont is in a 2019 study by the U.S. Commerce Agency. Vermont's the 4th highest state in terms of outdoor recreation's contribution to the economy. Of that contribution, snow sports are first, and then hunting, shooting related sports, the activities that my department engages in, is second, the second largest category in that outdoor recreation economic space. It's also an important part of the economy because our economic activities are dispersed across the state. They're often typically in rural areas, smaller businesses in towns and cities that are in more rural parts of the state and that have historically struggled more with their economies. So
Nathan, I'm sorry.
You're good.
Nathan's my grandson. Louis,
And your assistant.
yeah. Louis, could you get a little more granular in terms of this 1.8 million? Can you give us some ideas of the projects you've undertaken, how many of them there are, who you hire to do this work, et cetera?
Absolutely. So we did a variety of types of projects with that. In general, they were small size infrastructure projects that were done by local contractors. So we improved roads and parking lots. We improved ADA access to docks. We improved wildlife viewing access. We improved canoe and kayak access on some rivers so that people could get their canoes and kayaks into the water to use them. We developed a mobile app to guide people as they sought out our lands, to guide them through the hunting, fishing regulations, and to make them aware of where they could go. In large part because during COVID, we wanted to expand the types and variety of access so that people would be dispersed. We didn't want everybody going to Snake Mountain, which is our most used wildlife management area, gets very crowded. And so we wanted to guide people to more different areas. So that was the kind of, we improved access for people to fish from the shore so that even people who didn't have canoes or kayaks or boats could get that opportunity. So that's the type of projects that we did.
Did you have any projects that cost over $100,000?
Yes, I'm sure that we did. Probably some of the parking lot and fishing access type projects cost more than that. If I can share my screen, I'll just show you a couple of examples here. There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So these are.
Is it possible for you to make it full screen?
Yes. Oops. Okay. I think I have to stop sharing and come back. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay, great.
All right.
Driscoll?
Are you able to see that?
Don't worry about it. If it's
Sorry,
a problem,
I'm
don't worry.
technologically challenged.
Don't
apparently.
worry about it then. Sorry, I thought it was easy.
No, sorry. It's hard to switch once you're into the share screen.
Got it.
There we go. So this is ADA accessible docks at Mallett's Bay and Allen's Point, two of the access areas that we have. Here are some ramp improvements that we did to Kings Bay access area. This is a small project, obviously, but a big improvement in terms of use, just repaving, edging, and patterning of the St. Albans Bay access area. This is a little bit about our app. And here's the breakdown of the types of projects that we did by amount. So I'll go back to not sharing screen here so I can.
Well, that's helpful. Thanks. That's great.
Yes. Yep. So that was what we did with the 1.7 million in CARES Act money. And that brings us to the rescue plan funding and what we will plan to do with that. One of the things that my department has historically done wrong in past decades is we have largely turned away from the urban centers of the state, in particular in Chittenden County, because of the lower percentage of use in those areas, lower percentage of license holding. And I think during my time in the department, and certainly going forward, one of our goals is to not do that, and to recognize that, first of all, we have an obligation to serve everybody in the state. And second of all, a relatively small increase in license holding in use of all kinds in Chittenden County urban areas can make a big difference in terms of the percentage of Vermonters that we're reaching, even if the percentage of use stays relatively small. That dovetails well with our access on our additional lands that we're acquiring through the wetland money in the lower Winooski. And so one of our goals with this money will be to increase the ability for those in urban parts of the state, in particular Chittenden County, to access wildlands and wildlife as close to their where they live and work as possible, or by bringing them to it. And so our goal there is to work with groups like the Intervale Center. I think we have a lot of land near the Intervale. The Intervale farmers have issues with wildlife management that we can help with. And I also think that our programming, as both our programming and theirs are related to food and to procurement of people's own food, I think that is a natural fit for us. So that's the type of initiative that we want to turn to as a department. To get to specifics of the potential rescue plan money, we would like to improve both shore and canoe access to rivers and streams in the state, to bring it to start to bring it more on par with our access to lakes and ponds. We're lucky in Vermont to have among the best access to lakes and ponds in the country. Nearly every pond you can get a canoe or kayak on in Vermont has an access area, and you can get public access to it. The access to our rivers and streams is not as good, and we'd like to improve that. We'd also like to build on work that we have done, particularly Allie Thomas in my department has done, in providing outreach and education opportunities to communities that have not in the past had as free access, had as good access as some of the more rural parts of the state. So communities of New Americans, communities in more urban parts of the state, bringing programming to them. You know, we used to have this kind of philosophy that we welcomed anybody as long as they came to us. And that doesn't work. You go to people, you've got to go to where they are to provide them with those opportunities to make it work for them. And so to get from the the general to the more specific, we would like to provide access to those lands that we now own or that others own in the more urban parts of the state, both in the lower Winooski River and along Otter Creek near Rutland. And so that would be a goal for us with this money. I hesitate to go into too many details about specific projects because the amount of money, the time frame on which it comes, the Treasury guidance on how we can use it, the availability of contractors, all influence which.
Louis, you have frozen.
Maybe if you took off your video.
Louis, we've lost you.
Nathan, do you have a phone number for him?
I do. Maybe I can text him.
Or if people out there in Zoom land could text him,
Yeah, that would be
his
great.
colleagues who are probably watching this.
Yeah, I'm texting him right now. So
Wonderful.
Thanks. I'm not going to do it then. I'm going to let you do it.
Now we've lost the square.
So this brings up, Mr. Chair, while we wait for him to rejoin us, I had no power this morning. We have quite a bit of snow, as you've already heard, down here in Windsor County. And so I was madly making plans to figure out where I could go in town to be online. So I'm grateful for power today. Today's my power gratitude day because it came on just in the nick of time.
Good.
That was good. So he may have more money, Fish and Wildlife may have more money than what we have in our economic development, but we, as I'm understanding it, we're discussing his 2.25 million that is included in the governor's proposal.
Correct. And it's 2.25 every year for 3 years.
Right. So, sorry. Yes.
Is Senate Natural Resources looking at this too? I mean, should we be asking questions that are specifically about how this creates economic opportunity? I mean, there are wonderful places along rivers where they do like kayak tours. And is that kind of our angle here? Or-
Well, the economic development aspect of it is, and how it's to generate more economic development activity. I think that also some of his money is being used, if you look further down on this sheet, is in the water, is some water safety stuff that will be, and in climate change, there in water use. So I think that there are multiple ways that A&R and these departments of Forest Park and Rec and Fish and Wildlife, we can ask him once he comes back on, but I think that there may be multiple pots that they are going to be able to use. But this is specifically about how to enhance economic development.
I do not see anything in H159 that deals with this.
No, this would be,
in the budget thing.
no, we'd have to add it. This is,
Oh,
the
wait,
governor's-
add it.
We'd
I thought it existed in the budget and he was just.
Well, there's a
No.
lot of moving parts within the budget right now, so I assume Senate Appropriations is going to want to have us pass judgment on the governor's proposal. So,
I believe that's what, well, this was, just to refresh us, this is in Joan Goldstein's package that she presented on Tuesday.
correct.
But that was like an ARPA package.
Correct.
Do
But
they
that,
want- and they want to put it in H159 or?
I believe so, unless we come up with,
Still, that all of that has to be worked out.
Okay.
We'll be in
But-
close contact with
that's
appropriate.
the vehicle, probably, that or directly into the budget.
There he is in his car.
Okay, back in his, are you with us, Commissioner?
I am
Yeah,
pretty
just
slick.
keep-
get to the questions and my internet goes out. But I'm in the at the corner store on their Wi-Fi now. So
Oh,
Okay.
gee. That's what I thought I was gonna have to do this morning.
Okay,
We-
so I think you were talking about how you would likely use some of this 2.25 million. And you said there are a lot of unknowns still, guidelines, et cetera, coming and timing and, you know, we're facing on a lot of fronts. The question is the manpower, human resources out there to do this work. Everybody wants people, broadband, housing, some of the same people in construction that you would want. If I don't want to interrupt you, if you had more to say, or we can open it up to questions now. Maybe not.
Louis, did you disappear again? Well,
Frustrating.
yeah, no, it's. Is Steve, are you able, Steve, you're with us. Are you able to fill in some of this?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I don't want to get too much into strategy, but if there's specific questions, I could definitely help out with those. So
Okay, so yes, yeah,
Sorry.
where I was gonna go if Lewis was done is I'm just trying to get a framework of, Lewis did a good job of explaining what he's done with the CARES Act money. What other monies do you have and where would they be coming from that would supplement or correlate with this ARPA money?
yeah, great question. For the record, Steve Gomez, Vermont Fish and Wildlife. So with our state lands work that we do, there's a handful of funding sources that we utilize to get that work done normally. So on the fishing access, boating access side, there's federal funding called Dingell-Johnson funding that we use. That is a permanent appropriation that comes through federal excise taxes to each state. We use those funds, and we also use motorboat registration money. So we get a portion of the motorboat registration fee that DMV collects. So that money gets applied to fishing and boating access areas. So those funds would be, basically the ARPA funds would help with that work in those categories, and those funds would be part of that package. On the terrestrial side, so our wildlife management areas, those funds come from a couple different sources. The largest is our federal funding source, which is Pittman-Robertson. Again, that is a permanent federal appropriation that is based on an excise tax formula. So that's the main source of funding. We also utilize fishing and hunting license fees and the revenues from timber sales. So when we hold a timber sale on a department-owned piece of property, those funds then go into an account where we utilize those for other infrastructure work on WMAs. So parking lots, roads, kiosks, trails, those sorts of projects. So this funding would be complementary to those. Welcome back, Louis.
Okay. So,
I think I'm back by audio anyway.
okay.
Yes, you are.
Sorry
So
about that.
we were asking Steve in your absence, where some of your money for these kinds of improvements comes from presently, and he's given us a good list. I was about to ask, do you guys get any money from the capital bill at all?
We do. We get about 1 million a year, so 2 million per biennium in capital money, which goes to improvements to our facilities around the state primarily. And some of the types of work that we propose doing with the ARPA money would be similar, but I think our goal is to do things with the federal funding to expand access that we would not be able to do in the absence of it. So types of access improvements, broadening access and the people who can use that access more than we would with our what I'll call our regular money.
And Louis, because this is embedded in the economic development bill, and I believe we're being asked to include this in our H-159 by Joan first presented this to us. How do you see this growing your revenues? Access, I'm assuming you're equating increased access with increased revenues, but what are you projecting an amount of growth on that, or?
I would say that I think we're looking at this more as a way to increase or restore the recreation economy broadly rather than our revenues as a department.
Okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, some of these activities are actually, many of these activities are very important from an economics standpoint writ large across the state, not just to our bottom line. But so, all kinds of outdoor recreation equipment and supplies, but also when people go bird watching, they also, buy lunch and use gas to those kind of activities. So I think what we're viewing this as primarily about increasing that recreation economy more than our revenues per se.
Okay. Is there well, let me back up. In terms of human capital and personnel to do this work, I guess the first part of the question is, are a lot of things that you're envisioning with this money shovel ready to go this spring or this summer? And are you anticipating difficulty in finding the man or woman power to do this stuff?
I would say a qualified yes to both of those questions. So I think a lot of these projects are not designed or permitted yet. So they're not shovel ready in that kind of traditional sense of shovel ready. But having said that, what we discovered with the CARES Act money, which we had a very, very short time frame to spend in the end, like on the order of a couple of months, what we discovered is that we do a lot of these types of projects. And so both our staff and the contractors that we work with are well prepared to do that. We, and especially VTrans and BGS, have a lot of the contractors who do this work on retainer contract. So that improves and speeds the bidding process. And a lot of these are not exactly cookie cutter projects, but they're very similar to other projects that we do. So I think we'll be in good shape to get the money going as soon as we know that we are meeting the Treasury guidance on how to use it. To your second question, I think there's going to be a bit of a rush on contractors and equipment and materials from the federal money overall. And I think that's the case, but that's sort of the point, is to get businesses and people to work on this stuff, as well as the longer term economic benefits that it provides. So yes, that will certainly be true. We've worked through that before, and I think we will again. I was frankly blown away by our ability to get the CARES Act money out, and I'm confident we'll have similar success here.
Are there certain projects that can be done during the winter?
Some of them, if the groundwork is laid for them before the winter, can be completed in the winter. There are some projects that can probably be done in the winter. It gets difficult to do large scale construction of any kind, or any construction that requires work in the ground in the winter time, but some certainly can be.
Okay. And could you comment about the proposal from the governor to spread this over 3 years? I mean, it sort of seems symmetrical, but what's to say we shouldn't do, 10% in the first year and 45% in the next 2 years, or 50% in the first year and 25% each in the next 2 years? How did it come down that it's 2.25 million in each of 3 years.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition in that some of these, as with any project, some of these may take less time than we expect, and some may take more. I think spreading it equally in each of the years makes sense, given that the ultimate deadline for using the money overall is at the end of that 3 years. So when we got the CARES Act money, we would have we would have been very, very glad to have a few more months to complete some projects before the deadline to spend it came. And I think that that'll be true here as well. I would expect that some things that we expect to get done in the first year will go into the second year, and some projects will get done much quicker than we expect. I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question, except to say that maximum flexibility is good when you have this number of projects in the works across the state.
Yeah, it sounds like whatever we do, it needs to be implicit or explicit in the budget bill, if that's where this goes, that these monies would carry forward for these purposes into future fiscal years, as opposed to reverting to the general fund, because you could be mid-project come next July, and you need the money to complete the project, any given project. So we'll have to talk.
Exactly right. And if the legislature wanted to build in something where we report back on the status of this money, I think that would be a good idea. We do something similar with the capital money.
Right.
And I think that would be a good idea, but I think it's important that it continue on, or have the possibility of continuing on, so that we can get some of these done, even if they happen to go over into a next fiscal year.
Right. Otherwise, we'd be back into the CARES Act situation where you might
Right.
have to return to
Right.
the money. Senator
Yeah.
Rahm.
Commissioner, I didn't quite ask this of the sort of trail building folks, because I know that BYCC and others are really trying to diversify who participates in their programming, et cetera. But I am really curious if you're trying to do more to seek out women and minority-owned businesses, to seek out other people who don't have as much access to the recreational economy, to be partners in your work, and what that looks like, or how you might track that in the future.
Yeah, we are very much, and I would really appreciate the opportunity at some point to bring Allie Thomas in to describe some of her work in this area. But for instance, just as quick examples, we are actively working, and have been for a while now, with organizations like King Street Center, the Boy Scouts, and other clubs that have their own emphasis on diversity, and recognizing that our work needs to meet people where they are and invite them into what we do, rather than relying on long-standing family history of participation in these activities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've been quite successful in that. I think that improving our presence nearby to some of the urban parts of the state will help with that. But look, if you're a middle-aged white guy in Vermont, there's a good chance you participate in one of the things we do, whether that's birding or hunting. That's not as true for other populations in the state, other communities in the state. But the interest in those communities is great. So, as one quick example, we did our first year last year of a deer hunting novice weekend, which is basically like the youth weekend, but open to anybody who's holding a hunting license for their first time. Basically, adult onset hunters, we call them. We expected about 200 or 300 people. We got about 1,100 participating, and of that, 62% were women, which in the fish and wildlife world is unheard of. So I think we're making some success and some inroads. I think we have the opportunity and really the obligation to make some some money investment in infrastructure to support some of that. And that's our goal here.
Can I just one follow-up? So one, I mean, I guess two things. One, I think that's amazing, first of all. I really do. And it actually, in some ways speaks to Vermont's history of advancing some of the first women in Forest Service, parks, recreation management into major leadership roles nationally. So maybe we could also celebrate that more visibly with some infrastructure dollars as well, really recognize some of the women who've made history in this area. And two, I was speaking a little bit more to rec management and contracting over recreational enjoyment. But so I just want to note that. I don't know if you have any response, but like who gets contracts to do the construction work?
First of all, on your first point, yes, absolutely 100%. Second of all, yes, as a state in general and us in particular, we make an effort to employ and engage those businesses that are not owned by white men. and certainly welcome that. And I think it's important for us, not just because of the reason that it's important for all parts of state government, which are to support those types of businesses and those enterprises, but also because if we want to reach out to those other demographics, we need to have the people who work both within our department and work for us as contractors reflect the full spectrum of the state.
Mm-hmm.
May I just tag on to Acacia's line of questioning, Louis? It strikes me that with your effort to reach out to our urban populations, we have so many opportunities with new Americans, as you've alluded to. But new Americans, I mean, people who come from Nepal or from Africa, they all maybe hunted there. They all maybe were bird watchers there. They may just not know how to access that yet. So and would love to get to know the birds and animals and wildlife of this new world they are living in. And so I guess my question would be reaching out to them, and are we doing translating of your mobile app? Does your mobile app have any translation features to it, or do you have any? I mean, I assume you talked about the Winooski. You know, there's one of our richest, most diverse populations in Vermont. I think it's ripe with opportunity for people who did all these things where they came from.
I agree with you more than I can say. And yes, we do translation. In fact, we bring translators with us to some of these programs that are who are terrific and make it possible. And we also partner with organizations and groups that do translation and do English education as their mission. And so we bring the fishing or what other programming we have, and they bring the emphasis on English translation or English education.
Yeah.
And so it's been successful. One of the biggest barriers is transportation. And we are talking about ways in which we can overcome that barrier, you know, whether it's buses and vans or whether it's building wildlife related infrastructure in places where people can reach it by public transit or bicycle or walking.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. And I would love to have the opportunity. I know you have plenty going on in your committee, but I would love to have the opportunity to have Allie Thomas come in and tell you in more detail and with more knowledge than I have about what we're doing.
Great. At some point, I think she sounds terrific, and we would love to hear from her at some point.
She sure is. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions for Louis or Steve at this point? Okay.
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know how random this is, but you know, I feel like with our subsistence hunting populations are just people who access hunting. Lyme disease is still a major concern and a growing concern. And I just wonder, you know, if you're thinking about as people get to river corridors, et cetera, if there's kind of Lyme disease conscious river management or recreation management that we're employing and that can be bolstered by some of these resources.
Boy, it's such a great topic. So almost every single person in my department who works in the field has had Lyme. That's also true for the people who participate in the activities that we promote. as well. And so it's a huge topic of conversation for us. In terms of management on riverbanks, obviously, often the goals of river corridor management are to allow restoration of vegetation, of bushes and trees. But we have a huge conflicting goal or conflicting issue of often those are invasives that actually harbor ticks and do other damaging things to users and to the environment. So it's a balancing act. In some places, we're not able to have the restoration that we'd like to have because of the invasives. And in some places, we don't do everything we can do to remove invasives because of the importance they have in kind of restoring that riverbank or holding that riverbank together. And so it's a balancing act, like a lot of things we do. And ticks are similar. We don't want to scare everybody and tell them not to go outside because it's important that people go outside, but we also want them to be aware that there are risks there, and Lyme is a big one. So we certainly do a lot of that education. I don't know that we strike the balance perfectly, but it's certainly something on our minds a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louis, and thank you, Steve. Committee, we're gonna